Hey, thanks for joining us today, and if it's your first time tuning in, I certainly hope it's not going to be your last time. We want to encourage and inspire and equip you to live a better life, and we believe there's no better way to do that than following Jesus. So I hope you'll hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any of this content, and we're going to get rolling because today I want to share with you 2 habits that have brought sustained joy to my life for a lot of years. But first, let me remind you that we are right now in our annual season where we come together as a church to love where we live, and I will talk more about what that means in a minute. But first, there's a distinction that I think is important to make. See, all of us love a lot of things about where we live, but what we're talking about is how to love the people where we live, and not just the people like us or the people who like us. Not just the people who believe like us if we're Christians, or people who agree with us politically. Not anybody can love like that. For those of us who are Jesus followers, and if you're not, this doesn't apply to you, but Jesus set a much higher bar for the kind of love that we should show and be known for. His marching orders are for us to love one another the way He's loved us. And that is not a love based on feeling, and that is not a love driven by emotion. The kind of love Jesus shows us is a love that prioritizes other people before ourselves. It even prioritizes our enemies before ourselves. It is a love that is demonstrated by no strings attached generosity. That's how God loves us. For God so loved the world that He did what? He gave His Son with no strings attached. That's how we're called to love one another. And my guess is that is actually the kind of person you want to be, isn't it? You want to be known as selfless and generous and loving. But it's not easy. It's certainly not natural, at least not for me. The gravitational pull of your heart, the gravitational pull of my heart is towards self-centeredness. What's natural is to assume that everything I have is for my own consumption, and I should be in a never-ending chase to get more for myself. So to develop the superpower, if you will, of loving others the way Jesus does, well, good grief, that takes a lot of practice. That requires a plan. You've got to intentionally develop habits that God can use to move your heart from selfishness to selflessness. And because of where we live, because of what we're blessed to have, I think it's harder than ever to learn to love and to give this way. But it's not a new problem. The Apostle Paul, he wrote a letter to his friend Timothy a couple thousand years ago, and he was instructing him and instructing us on exactly how to do this, because it was a problem then too. He shares 2 habits that will help us learn to love like Jesus has loved us. So in 1 Timothy 6, here was the advice he wrote. He said to Timothy, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, not to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment." Paul says you better make sure that those of you who have extra, and that's all of us, isn't it? That you don't fall for the temptation of trusting what you have more than the God who gave it to you. I'm telling you, that's really difficult for me because my bank account feels a lot more tangible than God does. I can actually get my hands on my money. To which Paul would say, yeah, but your bank account isn't nearly as certain or dependable as God. You can lose that at any point. Now, for those of us who are Christians, we're quick to tell ourselves, and sometimes we're quick to tell everybody else that, oh no, my hope's in God. But listen, here's one simple way to reveal where our hope lies. Imagine that both of these statements were true, that you discovered on the same day these things were both true. Number 1, there is no God. Number 2, you have no money. Now, be honest with yourself. Which one would practically impact your life more? Which one would create more anxiety in you? Which one would you obsess about more that day when you discovered they were both true? The reason I ask that is because you can tell where you put your hope and where you look for security by how you react when it's threatened. If you're uncertain about your finances and that creates anxiety, it may mean your hope is in the wrong place. So to help us keep our hope in God, to help us learn to love like Jesus, Paul gives us 2 simple habits to practice. Here's the first one. He writes, command them to do good. Now, he doesn't say command them to be good. Okay, I'm sure you are good, but he says command them to do good, but not the way an average person does good. He raises the bar. He says command them to be rich in good deeds. So Paul tells Timothy, you tell all those Jesus followers who've got a little bit of extra that they should develop the habit of taking their time and doing good with it in a way that makes them rich in good deeds towards others. How do you do that? Honestly, it's pretty simple. You just practice the habit of serving. Now, I'm not talking about sporadic serving. We all do that. Most everybody in our communities will do good every now and then. Paul says, no. We Jesus followers need to intentionally practice the habit of serving if we want to learn how to love like Jesus. In other words, we should practice putting others before ourselves so often and so much that it becomes who we are and not what we do. So let's get practical. You've got some habits in your life, right? You have work habits, you have school habits, you got reading habits, exercise habits, eating habits, sleeping habits, travel habits. I mean, you got all these habits, and those habits shape your heart and they shape your life. I mean, you already know this. We form our habits, and then our habits form us. So assuming that you want to actually learn to love like Jesus, you got to have a habit of serving. You need a plan that pushes your focus off of yourself and onto people who can't do anything for you. So what's your plan? Can I give you a couple suggestions? You know, we've got a lot of great nonprofit organizations throughout our communities who need volunteer help. You've got some in your community. And I'm sure some of you serve at these regularly. I know those of you who are around here at Journey do, because I run into nonprofit leaders in our community and they tell me how incredible you are. So thanks for that. But for those of you who don't have a habit of practicing learning how to love, you might want to pick a nonprofit cause that you're passionate about. Just call them up and ask them, hey, can I serve for an hour or two every week? Here's another option. For those of you who live around here, you could actually serve here at Journey. I mean, we'd love to have you. And as we prepare for new people who are going to walk through our doors next week and the week after and the week after, we could use you, you know. We need you to help us love well all the adults and students and kids who will check this place out. So if you're local and you want to get involved here, you want to explore that, just scan the QR code right here on the screen and let us know. Because if you'll put a habit into your routine of serving others, just 1 hour of your 168 hours every week, listen, it will not magically make you an other-centered servant 24/7, but it is a start. It's a step. And you know what? It'll change somebody's life, and in the process, it'll start changing yours. Paul said we can't love well unless we do more for others with our time. That's the first habit. And then the second habit is this. He says, and you should be generous and willing to share. So Paul says, not only do you need to use some of your time for somebody else, you need to use some of your money to help somebody else too. Now, again, Paul's not talking about giving a little bit of charities here or there, you know, giving a little bit to your church, you know, helping out somebody at the holidays. I mean, any good American does that. This isn't being generous after you've gotten everything you want. All good Americans would do that. Paul's talking about developing a habit of giving that will eventually develop a generous heart in you. Now, what we all think when we hear this is, well, that's great, but I can't afford to give any more away right now. So if you just let me, I want to push on that for just a second. Think about this. When you want something for yourself and you don't feel like you've got enough money to get it, what do? Well, one of two things. You either spend a whole lot of time thinking and you get remarkably creative at figuring out how you can afford what you want, or the easier route is you just put it on a credit card and you figure out how to pay for it later, right? But either way, my point is you don't let that stop you from figuring out how to get what you want. So if you're trying to learn to love like Jesus and he's asking you to practice no strings attached generosity, I mean, if that really is important to you, why wouldn't you put that same amount of effort into figuring out how you can give more? Why wouldn't you figure out how to have a plan to make giving a prioritized practice in your life, not something you do sporadically or spontaneously? See, that's what people do who are trying to be rich well. They're intentional about how to be generous and willing to share. They just don't hope it'll happen. They make sure it happens. So let me ask you, do you have a plan for giving, or do you just give when you feel like it, when you're spontaneously moved or when somebody asks you? If you want to develop a generous heart, you've got to do more than sporadically give. I'll tell you what you need to do. You need to pick a percentage of your income, and then you need to give it first every time you're paid. You just need to make it an automatic habit. Now, if you believe in the mission we're trying to accomplish and the impact we're trying to make together as a church to impact the people around us, then you can do what Jen and I do. We set up recurring giving, and we give more here. We do it right here. But if you think the church, ours or any church, is out to get your money, that's fine. Just pick a nonprofit that you're passionate about and give a percentage of every paycheck to them. Now, we're right now in this season where we're doing our annual 4 offering, and we're giving every dime away to help nonprofit organizations in our community. So you can give to that if you want to. Just go to givejourney.com and choose that fund. My point, though, is just stop making excuses and start the habit of giving. Paul says, if you're a person who follows Jesus and you want to keep your hope in God, You don't want to, let what you have sneak in and steal your hope. If you want to learn to love where you live well, then don't do what everybody else does. Put some habits in your life where you learn how to do more and give more. Take what you have and get intentional about using it to do more for others before yourself. That's how you learn to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. Now, before we wrap up, I just want you to know I want this so much for you, and here's why I want it for you. Paul explains the impact of this on your life. He wraps this up by saying, in this way, by doing more and by giving more, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age. Now notice this. He says, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Listen, I want this for you because too many of you are chasing a life that quite honestly isn't even life, but you don't know it because it's the only life you've known. But you're chasing something that you'll never get. You're chasing something where you'll never be content because discontentment and a self-centered lifestyle, they are appetites that are never fully or finally satisfied. You will never have so much that it feels enough for you. Now listen, I'm not any better than you, but I am a little luckier than a lot of you because I had people early in my life who taught and then modeled what this looks like for me. And now I've got enough years of practicing these two habits of serving and giving, that I know the kind of joy, I know the kind of fulfillment, I know the kind of peace and happiness that this brings. I know how much better my life is because I practice the habits of saying yes to others with my time and money before I say yes to myself. And I just wish you could experience that kind of extraordinary life. But I also know motivating you to try this is so hard because if you start these habits today, well, things are not going to drastically change for the better tomorrow. There probably won't be a noticeable difference in your life next month. But habits over time, they do have a powerful impact. And you do this for a year, you do it for 5 years, you do it for 10 years, and you will become a radically different person. You will have a joy and a purpose and satisfaction in your life that you don't have right now. So if you're a Jesus follower, come on. Let's be like our leader. Let's develop the habits of giving and serving regularly so we can give and serve like Him. Let's love where we live. Let's love who we live around. Let's do more and give more so we can be more like Jesus. If you have any questions or comments, I'd love for you to drop them in the comments below. And if you think this would be helpful to a friend, don't forget to share it with them. And I'll see you next time on Journey at Home.